It's Wednesday, which means it's time to draft 2 more Best Ball Mania 4 teams here on the channel as I march along my quest to draft 150 teams all on stream. Wednesdays, we draft with the BBM3 champ, Pat Perine, fresh off of his celebratory anniversary mega stream yesterday. And of course, RotoViz's Shawn Siegele. These drafts get wild. Buckle up. It's Best Ball Mania time.
Oh, another Influencer 101 for the backward hats, bro. Rigged!
Zach Ertz with no Tyler Algier bringback? Yikes.
You reached around for correlation?
That's a no-no.
You ADP bros disgust me. How about you just live a little?
Handcuffing might actually be a way to get unique if the field's avoiding it.
The Wi-Fi at this resort is a disaster?
These fucking streamers don't have player takes. What if a piss boy draft is the room you need?
Oh!
All right, Pat, you're about to do your 8th streamed Best Ball Mania draft in less than 24 hours. No one can compete with me with probably volume of drafts, but within a tightly condensed window, you got me beat right now.
That's right. It's like one of those things, like I had that one peak season, you know? So like my like Hall of Fame credentials aren't that impressive, but you know, I've got my Brandon Lloyd, came out of nowhere and ran hot.
Yeah, if for some reason you guys don't know what we're referencing, yesterday was July 18th, which was the 1-year anniversary of when Pat drafted his $1 million team and King Capital, who won the regular season top prize for $1 million. They both coincidentally drafted it on the same day. So Pat had a mega stream yesterday. I joined Leone and Gretsch for a draft. He had a ton of great guests. So make sure you check that out on the Legendary Upside YouTube channel. I'm going to have to find time to watch that, Pat. I'm still angry that you're not going to service us audio listeners because I really want to hear this King Cap versus Chess Liam battle that I keep hearing about.
We'll just put it on YouTube, man. I'm like, I don't think dropping a 7-hour podcast stream makes a lot of sense, but you know, Pete's the only feedback I've gotten otherwise, by the way.
No. There are some people in the ship chasing channel. Our guy Phil, who helps produce on here and helps in the Legendary Upside Discord, said he had a big drive to Buffalo later this weekend. He was feeling very unserviced by you.
Okay. All right.
So what? Because I saw a few little nuggets on Twitter, and then I obviously drafted a team with you that was what I would call like a quintessentially frustrating piss boy stream room. Yeah. What was the overall texture of your rooms? Were they kind of similar to what we deal with over here?
Generally, they're pretty similar. Oddly enough, I feel like the last draft that I did, I said, because it was with RotoPat, and I was like, listen, I've been sort of trying to sneakily enter some of these drafts, but I don't want to do that with this draft. I want RotoPat to be shocked by this room. So yeah. I did like a 3-2-1 countdown to try to get as many people watching as possible to join the draft. And yet that draft ended up being probably like the most old school kind of like ship chasing from 2 or 3 years ago kind of draft where we were able to go zero running back. We were able to kind of get a lot of our player targets as well. Like some of the drafts that, you know, felt structurally okay. I think it was the draft I did with Davis. Like we were in a structure that felt fine, but we had like of all the players I don't like the guys I never really draft within a structure, which is sometimes those teams are actually kind of fun to have in your portfolio. But I felt really good about the team with Pat because, you know, both the structure and the players really were kind of reminiscent of years past, including my headphones dying and me having to make a pick on the call without being able to hear everyone and picking the guy that people did not want. So it was truly a throwback stream.
Yeah. And if you guys watched the draft, Leone, Pat, and Ben and I did, it was this classic thing where we were picking from the end of the round and we ended up taking the detour for Lamar, similar to what Pat and I did a few weeks ago. Sure enough, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman do not make it back to the end of the 7th round. And we end up having to select Odell Beckham. So like Pat, I have learned enough through this point. Like if we are in a piss boy room and Lamar is available at the 3-4 turn for us, no, we're just not doing it. We just can't take the detour. It's not going to happen.
All right, fine.
I mean, it is what it is here. Okay. Any other takeaways though from doing that exercise? Are you going to become a best ball streamer here?
I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed kind of doing a bunch of the best ball streams at once, but I don't think I'm going to be firing up a weekly stream. I certainly will stream more before the end of the year. But I don't know. It was when your first stream of the summer on your channel is a 7-hour stream, the next day, the idea of hopping back on the streaming saddle doesn't seem super appealing right away. But I'll be back out there streaming for sure.
All right. Well, we are going to be still streaming here every single Wednesday, and we have just hopped in a draft. I tip people off in the Discord. If you guys are YouTube members, you get access to those ping alerts. Looks like we got DJ Sabers in here. We got M Wolf, who's been in a bunch of my drafts. I don't know if I recognize any of these other names. We got Connor 100 in here. There are a few housekeeping things I need to do. We do play the Ducks on the first draft here, so let's get the Ducks fed. Pat, did you have any requests to play Ducks during your draft yesterday?
I did not.
Okay.
People, yeah. Although there's a lot of comments. I gotta say, the audio list definitely didn't consider this, but the commenters probably got. So I could have.
Pat, you are now having technical difficulties. Something just happened with your audio here. But real quick, let's make the pick. Do you want to go Kupp, McCaffrey, or Tyreek? Kupp. Yeah.
But
can I hear you now?
You can't hear me?
Now you're good. For a second, your audio seemed to cut out.
I'm gonna blame the Ducks on that.
Okay, yeah. Let me make sure the Ducks are down. And the other thing, Pat, that I need to do here before we start talking more shop is, I don't know if you heard, but it's cold brew week here on the channel. No hot coffee pours.
Oh.
But this involves just this elaborate setup. It's not as easy of just bringing down a pot. So just please indulge me here while I indulge the listeners here. We get our concentrate, Pat. It's about a 1/3 ratio we go for here. So we go 1/3 homebrew concentrate. Then we get ourselves some nice Poland Spring water here to top it off. And then the coup de grace, Pat, what the people really need is, because they don't get a hearty pour sound, they need to hear the ice clinking in the glass. So then I bring the spoon down for them. And then we're done. We're ready to draft.
I think I'm team cold brew.
You know what? I love cold brew in the summer, and I am on team cold brew too, Pat. But the setup of here, I'm like up in the kitchen and I'm pouring concentrate in a special little mug, and then bringing down a bottle of water, and then getting the ice filled, and getting my spoon and a little paper towel to put the spoon on after. And I'm like, this bit has gone too far.
No, it hasn't. in fact, my only note is that the concentrate really doesn't add anything. I would maybe even add the concentrate second so that we can get right, because the concentrate.
Yeah,
it doesn't have enough to move the ice, so you got to get the water, and then the concentrate can top off.
Well, do you know what another good thing, Pat? And I do like just doing my cold brew black, but if I wanted to service the video watchers to do just like a splash of oat milk in there and watch it kind of dissipate into the rest of the coffee, could be pretty good.
I mean, you really should do that.
Well, when I did cold brew the other day, one of your fellow Brooklyn residents, Clay, was telling me that I needed to get a mason jar is what I needed to be drinking my.
Oh, yeah, that would also be better. Yeah.
All right, we do have a piss boy room here. Tee Higgins off the board. Dude, I love Jonathan Taylor with
JT,
Kupp.
Man. Let's go.
I've gotten some like JT with AJ Brown, but I have not gotten any JT with Kupp. That's fun.
Really? I feel like I should check your fantasy life best ball tool.
Yeah.
And see how much, but I've got a decent amount is my feeling on it. I have a lot of Taylor. I'm at like 16% Taylor, and it's almost all picks around this range.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I don't know what. I'll check my stuff. I'm almost positive I don't have any Kupp Taylor.
I really don't get the Taylor thing. Like Chubb's now going up to the 1-2 turn in a lot of drafts. Like I would rather have Taylor than Chubb.
Yep. Gator bait. This is right. We got the 2022 101 and 102. We are on the clock, Pat, so we can grab one of our double anchors here. I think that's optimal. I'm also down to do like a Mark Andrews thing if you want to try to play an elite tight end. But what do you think is the best way to play this?
I'd be down for Andrews. I'm back to taking Brees in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So
I want you to choose. Who do you want?
Brees.
Okay. I do think so this is an interesting one, even with because we talked about this last week, the kind of, pumping the brakes on Brees if we do get cheaper Brees. So even with that kind of Dalvin Cook specter, you're Brees over Rhamondre?
Well, this is what I don't get, is that the Patriots are the other team that appear to be in the running right now for Dalvin Cook. So it's like, why isn't Rhamondre getting dinged for? And when I hear that, I'm like, well, why are the Jets interested in Dalvin? Like, presumably they're only interested in Dalvin because Breece Hall is coming off a torn ACL and their backup's Michael Carter. And they're kind of going for it. And they're trying to make sure they don't have any holes in the backfield. That doesn't make me concerned about their opinion of Brees. It makes me concerned about their opinion of Brees's health a little bit.
Right.
But maybe they're just being like kind of prudent, given that they're kind of going all in with Rodgers here. With the Patriots, the mere fact that they're interested in Dalvin Cook is a red flag on its own. Like, why are they interested in Dalvin Cook at all? They're not really going for it. Rhamondre, it's also in the context of them kind of floating more about this Ty Montgomery stuff. I guess you could argue they don't really have much depth at the position. Although Pierre Strong, I think, certainly is more enticing to me than like a Michael Carter at this point, but very unproven. So depth-wise, maybe they could use the help. But if they just wanted depth, like they could go get Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette or Zeke Elliott. Like Cook's gonna, he's demanding the most money. So their interest in the most expensive one of these backs, I think, is a red flag for Rhamondre.
It's a really interesting dynamic that we now have in this early third round for the running backs, right? Because to your point, I just did pull up the live odds on Dalvin Cook's likelihood. Plus 350 the Jets, implied probability of 22%. Plus 375 to New England, 21%. So right there. So that dings Brees and Rhamondre. Now we also have this holdout stuff with Josh Jacobs, to where I do think we're going to probably get some cheaper Josh Jacobs. And now all of a sudden, all of these backs that we were like, hey, these are the screaming targets here in the early third. Now they all have their own, host of question marks.
And so I'm back to talent. And to me, Breece Hall is the guy who has the legendary profile to me far more than the other guys. As good as Jacobs was last year, he still didn't really get that close to a legendary season. Not to say you can't do it, but Breece Hall is the one who flashed the level of efficiency that we're really talking about.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be, how long do you think this Dalvin Cook stuff is going to drag on? Do you think something gets done before the start of the season?
Oh yeah. Before the start of the season. I think so.
All right. We are on the clock here. I'm definitely on board with DeAndre at these prices. Anything else that jumps out to you?
I think DeAndre makes the most sense for this team. Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking with Leone about this yesterday, where he had him as an early fourth round value, I think, in their new rankings projections. I think this is like a solid landing spot, all things considered. Obviously it's not Bills and Chiefs, but I'm pretty excited about a Tannehill led Titans offense with Hopkins, Nuke, and the big dog.
I'm not with Leone on that level of value. I do think Hopkins has fallen off some. I think he's more of like an underneath intermediate type of guy. He's not the downfield dominator that he was in his prime. And I think that creates risk, given that this is going to be a low volume passing offense. But he did convince me that I was probably being a little bit too nervous about it. So I've now got him basically exactly where we took him. Like I would take him over Christian Kirk now. Yeah. After talking to Leone, but
I know you like Ayuk. Are you still Hopkins over Ayuk?
I'm still Hopkins over Ayuk. Yeah. It's scored. Yeah. I was sort of struggling with it because it's a pretty flat tier and trying to figure out exactly where to place him, but I ended up slotting behind DJ Moore, but ahead of those other guys.
So we're on the clock. Deontay Johnson has steamed up here. You still got Godwin, who I know you don't like a ton. Marquise Brown, JSN. What direction you want to go here?
I'd be inclined to just take JSN.
Yeah, I'm never turning down JSN. Again, similar to those early third running backs that now have question marks, like the early fifth round. And I guess you could say most of the fifth round for wide receivers is kind of like another soft dead zone here, where I tend to really like the guys in the sixth.
Yeah. I've always thought it's been kind of dead because I don't like Godwin that much.
Right.
So I know Shawn loves Godwin, but I'm just not. I'm at 7%, and I have him in some high stakes stuff. So I have my Godwin. Like, I'm slightly behind the field, but in my overall portfolio, he'll represent more than like 8% of it.
Yeah.
So I have Godwin. You know, I'm not out, but it's like kind of he's been more of a volume based play, and he's on a terrible offense. So
yeah. I did the other day, was it Monday? I think I shared that draft with you where I did that hyper fragile build where I started CMC, Pollard, and Rhamondre. And in that one, I believe Hopkins and Godwin were my first two, where I do think when I'm kind of trying to catch up at wide receiver and just give me that volume there.
Yeah.
But in this build, we took two, kind of Hopkins and JSN are kind of fun ways to like polarize like the type of wide receiver you're taking.
For sure. And you're with Kupp. So Kupp's like
True.
holding down. You almost have two wide receiver spots to fill after Kupp. You know, you're paying so much for him. You need him to be Kupp.
What ended up being your favorite draft that you did yesterday where you thought everything like came together nicely?
The last one that I did.
Yeah.
The one where my headphones died. So it's funny because I didn't pick Rachaad White. I was like trying to figure out who they wanted between Rachaad White or Isaiah Pacheco. And I just had to start starring people. I knew we needed a running back. But then Pat held up this. And I was like, what the F is that? And I was like so confused that I actually switched it back to Pacheco just as like, I don't know what this could mean, but it doesn't mean. It was a W for White.
Oh, that's like the lost, not Penny's boat. You know, you guys are just like communicating through sign language to get this draft done.
Yeah, but I went back to Pacheco. And then the internet freaked out thinking he was going to miss the first 6 weeks, which is hilarious.
Yeah, we're starting like yesterday was probably one of the first like big like news fire hose days, and not all training camps have even kicked off yet. So I mean, it's gonna be pretty wild.
Yeah, it did make me question, like the reaction to the Pacheco stuff was kind of embarrassing, wasn't it?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, like there's this thing about the pup, you know, they might go on the pup, but like that does not mean he's going to miss 6 weeks of the season, which was what everyone's reaction was, or even they don't miss week one.
Field. Yeah.
They have a like a off-season pup or a training camp pup list.
And Kendra got placed on that too.
Yeah, but I'm like, with my rankings, I'm always struggling. Like, how much of this is baked in? And I've known for a while that Pacheco might miss the first half of training camp. That's been common knowledge for a long time. Maybe not common knowledge, but it's been reported widely that he's going to miss the first half of training camp most likely. And it's like that's known for weeks and weeks. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's probably baked in. His ADP's fallen a little bit, but it's just hard to know. And then I'm like, no, I guess it wasn't baked in. And now people are baking in nonsense that he's going to miss the season.
Yeah. We're about to pick here at 6'10". Our team so far, double anchor with Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall, 3 wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, and JSN. We will see what And Brig does here at 6'9". Then we're up at 6'10". Best available wide receivers right now, Kadarius Toney, Gabe Davis, Pickens. Yeah, Pat sighing as Jordan Addison comes off the board. What do you like in this range?
Is there any tight ends? Can we try to take a tight?
I think this is the classic. I mean, we should get 2 of this group.
Okay. I mean, I like Burks as much as any of these other guys to pair with.
You want to do the double stack? Because then this pushes us to
let's make the chat mad.
So this is very similar to the hyperfragile one I did on Monday, where I did get Burks and Hopkins, and then Tannehill, at least in the drafts I've done since the news, he hasn't really pushed up a ton. I'm completely fine with that. I was trying to see the only other, we didn't take Rhamondre, so the Gabe Davis week 17 correlation wasn't quite as big of a deal there. So I don't know. I think you can go any direction with those.
I have Gabe 1 spot ahead of Burks in my rankings, but it's like, if you already bet on Hopkins, to me, I want to bet on Burks. You're betting on a Seahawks situation. It's concentrated. two Seahawks from last year, or Dolphins from last year.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like some people, when I posted my Burks, Hopkins, and it was like, oh, good luck with two, Tannehill wide receivers. And I'm like, kind of I almost would rather have two than one, in that, like, if one of those guys absolutely smashes, it means they're probably having a really good season on the whole. I am happy to take Gabe here, though, as he slides a bit. And by slides a bit, I mean at ADP in this room. I mean, I've been taking, you can see here, I'm almost double the field on Quentin Johnston. My Davis stuff has been, I think it's because I don't take Allen a lot, but I'm still slightly overweight on him. He still feels like a nice, I don't know, risk reward bet relative to these other wide receivers.
Yeah, I was thinking that I might have a bit of a leak with Gabe Davis, and then I should be more aggressive. I'm at 11%, so I'm not out at all, but he feels like the kind of guy who could come up in ADP a decent amount. And I say that because it felt like he kind of got docked with the Hopkins thing and then just like never recovered. Like, why are we nervous about Gabe Davis at all now? Like, he's going to be out there in two wide receiver sets for like every snap. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, in this room, but I'd rather him over Pickens, right? Like, why wouldn't? Yeah. You're hoping Pickens becomes Gabe Davis. Is basically, that he starts having some of those random spike weeks, but his quarterback play is so much worse. So even if he's better than Gabe Davis as a talent, like, his production is probably going to be like equivalent to Gabe Davis. So I don't know.
Do you know what example that when you say that there's kind of like this lag of people bracing for Hopkins and then it never caught up, it reminds me of what happened with Jonathan Taylor a couple years ago when Taylor had his legendary season, and it was the season where Carson Wentz, I believe they were having some like quarterback uncertainty where no one knew. I think Carson Wentz was hurt and everyone was like, who's going to be the quarterback?
That's right.
And JT was like sliding to like the mid and late second, even though he was coming off of like a really encouraging rookie year. And he ended up obviously being the league winner that year. But his ADP, even when Wentz was then confirmed the starter, he still kind of just hovered and only came up a bit because people were so anchored to that initial fear.
Yeah, I forgot that's why that happened. Yeah, he was like a late first, and then he dropped to the mid to late second, and then he came up, but he was going next to like Gibson in the 202, 203 range. And one of the reasons that being in on Antonio Gibson that year hurt so much is that you could have had way more JT if you weren't. It's a weird dynamic. I don't know. I mean, I think people just kind of forget to like update certain guys. Like, oh yeah, I liked Gabe Davis a lot more before this Hopkins, rumor.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest examples of just maybe if you want to push back on ADP being efficient, you could talk about like ADP anchoring to like the molasses level news, right? When there's like some kind of big piece of news, everyone reacts to it pretty aggressively. But some of those like slow drip things that take forever, like the ADP anchoring is going to be stronger than say a handful of sharp drafters like properly adjusting to it.
Right.
All right, we're about to be on the clock at 8:10 here. This is what I always refer to as kind of a gross portion of the draft, although a couple interesting names here at the top relative to ADP sliders here. We'll see what And Brig does. He takes James Conner. Zay Flowers does fall to 94 here. Anything else you'd be interested in?
I think we're almost like legally obligated to take a falling wide receiver in this room.
I think so too. I have no problem. I like Zay at this price. There's all the Miami Dolphins running backs that you can get to correlate with him. And it really does set us up for not having to reach on really any other wide receivers.
The other thing about Zay at this price is like, this is where you could just get him being like a one-off league winner and not like the correlate. Because I mean, this is almost where we were getting Garrett Wilson last year. He's not nearly the level of prospect that Wilson was, but in this room, I feel pretty psyched about getting a first-round rookie wide receiver this late.
Yeah, and then it does set up here to be a very sweet spot for running back. Tight end, Njoku and Freiermuth are here, but that feels early. No QBs that we really need to take here. Do you have a favorite running back?
I mean, James Cook correlates with Gabe.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I mean, you can see here I have 17.4% James Cook, so I'm always down to click him. You could do the Charbonnet with JSN, similar thought. But if you just want to play the ADP, Cook is a little bit more rare here.
Yeah, let's do Cook.
Cook's a fun third running back here. And then just to kind of like look at our quarterback stuff. So we have Tannehill, we have Stafford, we have Geno. Those are our quarterback options. You could also do something with potentially Rodgers, who tends to fall. And then whatever we do at tight end, maybe it's also kind of keeping in our back pocket, breaking some ties in favor of tight ends with later quarterbacks, because we're not going to be selecting probably more than one more wide receiver.
Yeah, I think we'll do one more wide receiver because we're going 3 quarterbacks.
Yeah. Chris says, is the like button broken? I just checked. Yeah, only 41 likes. It must be broken. Can you guys smash it and see if you can turn it on, turn it off, and get it working again? Appreciate you. As always, for all of my draft streams, these are eligible for the comment giveaway. We're well on our way to 15,000 subs. When we hit that, I'm going to give away $500 to 3 different winners. And to get entered into that drawing, all you have to do is leave a comment on my draft streams. I have created a playlist on my YouTube channel, so you can go back, leave comments on all of those old ones. And I've already had some people reach out, Pat. I got some data scrapers who are going to help me do some heavy duty data scraping to pull all of these comments, get rid of the fluff and the duplicates, and make sure we have a high integrity to this contest.
Nice. Are you going to be submitting that to the
best ball data bowl? I should. It's just like, and it's me just like asking someone, can you send me the code that you use? So they'd be like, this is how I got all my comments.
I don't think you'll win, but I think it would be a great submission.
Yeah. Yeah, Tyler saying like to help Pat recover from yesterday. We
Please.
Also said we mentioned this at the end of our stream on the Legendary Upside mega stream yesterday. Gretch and I wanted redemption drafting because that team we drafted left such a gross taste in our mouth. So I believe we are going to do a Best Ball Mania draft tonight on Ship Chasing as well, Pat.
Yes, we are.
Yep. Yes, as Nick said here, the Best Ball Data Bowl. Check out Monday's show. I had Dillon come on, who just did a really cool submission looking at running back archetypes and the type of late round running backs you want to be selecting. He had some interesting research kind of comparing the true handcuff types versus the backs in ambiguous backfields like the Bears, the Dolphins, the Saints. So check out his findings, and you can also review his entire submission, how the sausage was made, over on the Best Ball Data Bowl site, which I linked to down below. That contest locks on August 1st. I know a few of you are keeping your submissions in your back pocket until the last minute, but really excited to see what all the data whizzes come up with here.
So are these Best Ball Data Bowl? Oh, sorry. Let's.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just think is it like Best Ball where you're trying to time your entries?
I think so. I was kind of hoping Pat would fall to us at 118. Correlation with JSN and out to another quarterback, but too good to be true there. I mean,
did Richardson go? I didn't see him, but
he did. He went in the
right?
80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Penny makes a ton of sense. What's the other half of the board look like a quarterback? Are we?
Yeah, because that's the thing. If we want to see, where's the Metcalf drafter? The Metcalf draft, DJ's behind us. So if we want Metcalf, we probably need to take him now. Or sorry,
but
Geno.
He's got a quarterback, so I think let's take Penny.
Yeah, let's do Penny. Because we still have options at quarterback. The other thing too is I'm always down. Daniel Jones is a nice out for us as well with Kupp.
Yeah.
And sets up. The only thing that kind of stinks about taking Daniel Jones in a zero or in a wide receiver heavy build is like we're probably not gonna end up double stacking him.
Right. Yeah.
But I still I think a Daniel Jones skinny with Cooper Kupp on the comeback still can make a ton of sense here.
We could also, like, Daniel Jones has enough rushing upside where I could go 2 quarter. Like, I guess Jones Stafford doesn't work. So we need a second that works. But someone of that, quality.
Yeah.
The issue is Stafford's such a value that it's tough to find a replacement for him. But anyway, if we could get someone okay with Jones, I'd be okay with too.
Yeah, I think even though Dak continues to slide, I think for this build and getting quarterback upside, we have no correlation with Dak. I mean, DJ's the pick, right?
Yeah, DJ's the pick.
I really like getting Daniel Jones in those as your first quarterback when you've, been prioritizing other positions and we don't have a ton of other stack options here. So I think Jones was a nice pick there. 9 picks past ADP. Our team here through 11 rounds: Daniel Jones at quarterback, 4 running backs: Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, James Cook, Rashad Penny. Wide receivers: Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, JSN, Treylon Burks, Gabe Davis, Zay Flowers. Pretty fun team here, Pat.
Yeah, I like this team.
Have you, what would you say, like, obviously yesterday was a stream you did with a bunch of different people, but have you found yourself with some of your drafts, like I feel like mine are just so all over the map, like stylistically, I'm like doing hyper fragile here, elite here, punt, QB, but like, do you find yourself in any like new metas right now with your drafting tendencies?
I would say my biggest drafting tendency is that I tend to, it's rare for me to have like 3 running backs before round 8, but very common for me to have at least 4 running backs like through round 12 or 13.
Yeah,
that's kind of my biggest thing. Like I'm not taking a lot, and I'd also say I'm usually done drafting running back by, well, sometimes I push it and I'll grab a Fournette or a Hunt or a Zeke or something. But that's usually like my last running back. And I don't take a lot of like the super flyer running backs, which I plan to switch once we get like training camp info. Yeah. And there's like, and we know like, oh man, like you got to be drafting
Malik
I don't
Davis.
know, whatever.
Yeah,
Malik Davis, or like Pierre Strong has like completely taken over the number 2 job behind. Like, Ty Montgomery's not a thing. It's like Pierre Strong now. Or Isaiah Spiller is like, they're shocked at how much better Isaiah Spiller looks. Like, I will take Isaiah Spiller then. I haven't taken a single Chargers running back other than Eckler so far.
One thing I've been starting to think about more, and for a lot of the early part of the drafting season, I wasn't really worrying about like uniqueness elements a ton. But as I start to think through some of these 2 running back 3 battles, I've started to think about it a little more. Like, I like Pierre Strong. I drafted a shit ton of him in the big board. Like I think I called him this year's Eno Benjamin at one point, which could be a compliment or very much not a compliment. And the thing is though, Pat, like he gets drafted based on his ADP, like in like 80 to 90% of drafts. Even a guy like Chase Brown is getting drafted in 95% of drafts, and Travion Williams is getting drafted in 5% of drafts.
Right.
And so I am starting to think about like, I don't love those guys who are fringe bets and are getting selected at a really high clip. So where I've actually, when I do my stuff right now, if I need a super late flyer, I have been taking Travion. And obviously if the news dictates differently, I'll switch that out. But right now, when the information isn't there, I just prefer the guy that's getting drafted at a 90% less clip.
100%. But the way I'm thinking through it is like, I'm not taking either guy right now. I'm taking like Michael Mayer, because I'm just like, that's just like free points in the final round, or, you know. So, what do you think what are we doing here?
So there's a lot of options here. Dalton Schultz correlated as the bring back with our Tennessee bet. We could Kincaid and build out the Big Bills bet. You could do anything with the Rams counter to with Higbee. I think one of these 3 tight ends is the pick.
Higbee, it brings back another bring back, which could be helpful on Daniel Jones. Like Kupp gets us there, Higbee actually blows up on a bring back Daniel Jones thing.
The only thing is, Pat, are we going to, in this build, are we going to want any other Tennessee or Houston pass catchers, whereas Schultz?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you're right. Schultz is the way to go.
Pat, as much as I'm willing to capitulate on a Robert Woods share, this doesn't look like the Robert Woods share team to me.
No, we don't have the wide receiver bullet. Yeah, that's a good call.
And also I would just guess like preference, by drafters, they're probably going to rank it, Kincaid, Schultz, then Higbee too. So still a chance Higbee comes back, at which point, like I'm still on board with that.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking enough about the Schultz bring back.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I drafted a very similar team the other week and I got shut out on Schultz, and then someone took Mechie in 13 and took Robert Woods in like 15, and then next thing you know, you're taking Tank Dell to get a little correlation on your big double stack there. Yeah, so we'll see what DJ does here. I think Higbee's the pick, right?
Yeah.
And that also, we could, if we get a big Stafford fall too, this is probably a 3 QB room, right, Pat?
Yeah, probably. I don't love having 2 guys from the same game.
Yeah.
But I've done it.
Yeah. Have you taken, yeah, because that is the thing. When you look at the quarterbacks available to us, it would be like multiple guys from the same game. Because I was even going to say, like, have you done anything with CJ Stroud? I mean, that I have not clicked him at all.
Oh, I've taken him.
The same. You have? Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken him a decent amount because he's going to be playing in week 17. Like that's, yeah. I'm at 9.5%. So it's
okay.
Not above the field. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a chance he runs. I don't think he's going to run, but there's a chance. And there's also a chance he's just like, very efficient in this offense, and maybe throws for some touchdowns in the right week. And it's job security, and it's, maybe he comes on down the stretch and we start to think like, oh man, this guy was undervalued a little bit in the draft process. So
yeah,
it's not like, yeah.
I think I think I said this on another show where it's like, I want to get some more Stroud, but he just doesn't strike me as someone who's going to move up a ton. So I feel like you're going to be able to pack your Stroud bags kind of whenever you want. We got Mark in the chat. What's up? I've done the majority of my drafts in June. Would you recommend mixing in some more drafts as ADPs have shifted since then? So
yes.
I'm partly by content purposes, partly by preference. I like drafting year round. I like drafting in different times. I think there's pros and cons to all of the different windows, but in general, I think yes, like you want to be drafting throughout the year. And as we get closer to the start of the season, you're going to get more information and you're going to be able to build better teams with less dead roster spots. And so unless you are hammering a specific ADP edge early, I do think you should be still mixing in drafts down the stretch. And also, Mark, you must be new here. We made the very tough decision a few weeks ago after, talking with Big RotoViz about the podcast that I do with Shawn going on their feed. We decided that Feed the Ducks was best placed here so the RotoViz airwaves could be free of the duck oppression. Speaking of Tyler using the Laird emote, that doesn't pull up when I pull it here, but you guys can probably see it in the chat. Davis and I are getting together with Laird on Friday for a podcast right before he heads off to Bucks training camp. I don't think we're going to do it live, but you can keep an eye out for that sometime Friday. Very excited to talk to him just kind of about all the running back discourse right now too, with the holdouts and the contracts. He always has, thoughtful, insightful comments on that. And, he's firmly in the mix there as well. So keep an eye out for Davis and Laird and I getting together for a show here.
Nice.
So yeah, Pat, we're going to have a decision here as far as because it really does. I know we really want to get Tannehill. And then the question is, who's that third quarterback? I feel like the Stafford double, when we're getting to a third quarterback anyways, having those two from the same game isn't bad, but do you have any other? We can also probably push Stafford still too. Like if you wanted to get like Sam Laporta as like a third high upside tight end.
I would probably just do Stafford, but I don't know. Or we could do we need the other running back? We could go like Ford.
Oh, we were talking about getting a Dolphins running back, though. Let's take Stafford and regroup. Let's take Stafford and regroup. I think that's one of those spots, right, where it's like there's other guys we like. There was so much coverage at quarterback that if we did have a consensus on another player to take, we could have done it. But I don't. We almost have too much flexibility in this draft. I'm like looking at all these players. I'm like, oh, Tyquan Thornton as a bring back to our Bills stuff. Oh, we got Miami running back as a bring back to Zay Flowers. We have all kinds of different options we could go here with 4 more picks left.
Yeah. Kind of wish we took a wide receiver there. But we'll see what happens here.
Which were you eyeing, Thornton or someone else?
Hodgins.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been taking a ton of Hodgins because I take so much Hyatt and Wandell now, but I'm happy to mix in Hodgins here. This would probably be our last wide receiver.
That's probably our last guy, yeah.
So we have a 2-4-7-2 build right now. We got Daniel Jones and Matthew Stafford. Cover your ears, Justin Herzig on that pairing. Running back, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, James Cook, Rashad Penny can definitely get to the 5th running back here at our leisure. Wide receiver, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, JSN, Treylon Burks, Gabe Davis, Zay Flowers, Isaiah Hodgins. Hodgins giving us that bring back on the Matthew Stafford double stack with Tyler Higbee and Dalton Schultz. So I feel like this draft is kind of coming to us fairly nicely as far as getting our stacks, getting our correlations, and decent ADP values.
We could do Tannehill as a 3rd quarterback here.
Yep.
And we could do just 2 tight end, I think.
We could.
Right? So then we're talking about, and that would actually give us the potential to go with 8 wide receivers, wouldn't it?
We could. Yeah. I think we have a luxury pick that we can put. So if we know we're getting to 3 quarterbacks and 5 running backs, it basically is it a 3 tight end or an 8 wide receiver build?
Exactly. So let's save that for the 18th round. Mm-hmm. And then
you're going to have a giant wide receiver or a tight end you like in the 18th. Most likely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Although maybe, as much, I guess it does depend. I guess Wandell and Hyatt could be off the board by 14, but even then Slayton's probably there. I don't know.
Worst case, we could take 2-2.
Well, where that David, that's the best case. One other thing though about those guys' likelihood of coming back is we also have the Stafford side of it, right? So anyone trying to dial up that game stack, like we've cornered the market on wanting pieces from that game, assuming that our draft mates are interested in that.
Although there's so many pieces that maybe there's like someone's trying to do a little mini thing the way we were doing with the Bills and the Patriots.
That's true.
I've sometimes wondered if best ball drafting will be much harder like 2 years from now because everyone's going to do their little mini correlations and it's going to screw up your main stacks. You'll be like, oh, this guy sniped me on this. Like, why? And you're like, oh, because he has like a running back on a receiver from the other team and he brought it back.
It's, I was talking about this Monday too, and I had pulled up some research. I think it's ZWK football on Twitter. And he had basically used some of the Chad data from the Badge Bros, accumulating that and looking at what percentage, and again, that's a smaller cohort, but how many people are actually stacking in week 17. And it was about like 10% for those different ones. And it still makes me think too, like we're so far off from the majority of the field, doing a bunch of mini correlations, like it does still feel like
we're 2 or 3 years away, but I think we'll get there. Probably. Just look at DFS, like people do that stuff in DFS all the time, right?
Yeah. Does correlation with running backs matter much or just with pass catching running backs? To me, the correlation is I just want a game where there's a shit ton of points scored. And if that happens, it's often that 2 players from the same team or a player on the other team is also going to be the benefit of that game environment.
Yeah, I think that running back correlation is probably pretty underrated at this point. I think people are, it's a little bit that it's just not been researched as much. The week 17 stuff that Leone looked at, it wasn't really a part of that. He didn't include running backs and kind of the game stacking stuff. But I think that especially if you're getting, speaking of running backs, we should probably take, we need a running back here, right?
Yeah, we could just take Tannehill and then figure it out.
Yeah, okay.
Unless there's a guy you really like here.
Not really. I mean, Gus Edwards.
You want to do double Baltimore and do Gus with Zay?
With Zay, yeah.
I don't have a lot of Gus. I think he's fine. Let's do it. What? Yeah, I saw. Yeah, normally Jeff Wilson is my safety net there at the end of drafts. He didn't make it back to us in this room. I was gonna also wonder, would we consider Jawan Johnson if he slid all the way there? Although we didn't have any correlation pieces with him. But sorry, what were you gonna say?
Well, like, okay, so my team had Saquon and Daniel Jones on it, which didn't end up being something that was like particularly highlighted because Daniel Jones didn't ultimately make my final roster. But Saquon was a big reason why I got to the final. Then he flamed out and his quarterback went nuts. And it was, you know, it's a rushing quarterback as well. I think that's sort of instructive in some ways. Like, oh yeah, we are trying to win 3 uncorrelated tournaments in a row. It's helpful to have pieces that are both positively correlated for the course of the entire season. The Giants offense was good. You wanted pieces of the Giants offense, especially those two. And so they beat ADP together. They help you advance. Because the offense is good, it can help you advance through single week tournaments because either the quarterback or the running back is likely to have a good week and a good enough week that it's going to hit your lineup in the type of score that's going to advance you through 1 out of 16 type of field. And then when you get to the final, you have one of those pieces probably a little bit low owned because it's not that common to stack quarterback and running back right now. And they are a little bit negatively correlated on a 1 week sample. So like I love taking Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor together. You know, I think I can get a low owned Taylor into the final or a low owned Richardson into the final. And they have really high single week. And look, when I do that, I also want to stack Anthony Richardson with his pass catchers because that's like, it's one thing to get a leveraged naked Richardson in, but if you can get leveraged stacked Richardson in, even better. So, you know, generally it's something, there's not a lot of cases where I don't like it, kind of given where the ADPs are on the running backs and quarterbacks. Because in a lot of cases, even the expensive quarterbacks have cheap running backs. So,
yeah, I'm with you on that too, because I think you get too caught. Like if you really are thinking about the negative correlation element, you are narrowing it down to a single week, basically week 17, and in the like upper 95th percentile outcomes for those two players. But the benefits of regular season macro correlation on a team that just smashes and the ping ponging effect and getting unique guys through, I think the benefits just far, far outweigh the downside of showing up in week 17 with Pat. It's like, all right, Pat, you didn't use Barkley's score. Boo-hoo. You got the massive, massive game. In a way, it's almost like kind of leveraging the other piece. If you're like, I will take a sacrificial lamb from these two pieces if the other one rises to the top so much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, Pat, we are going to have our choice of any Giants wide receiver. Hyatt, Wandale, Darius, make it back here. I'm fine rocking. We do so many 3 tight end builds. There's no obvious tight end here.
Fine.
It's actually gotten kind of wiped out.
Yeah, it's totally fine to go 2 with this group. I think Schultz is like the last one.
Who's your favorite here of these guys?
Well, what do we need? Like, let's look at the room real quick.
We want as much upside as we can because we have Kupp.
I think it's probably Hyatt then.
Yeah, I think I'm fine getting my Hyatt now closer to Robinson now that they're both free. It's kind of insane that Hyatt Wandale. I think I've said this on stream like 9 times. Like their prices are still kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I like Wandale too. And what we're looking for here, I think, is just purely a week 17 thing. And this gives us, you know, I think Slayton is not the answer because we have Hodgins. If Hodgins is like a partial hit, it's because he was an early season hit and then fell off late season. So you don't want to do the same thing with Slayton, who's like the exact same archetype. But Hyatt and Robinson are the reverse. And then to me, it's like, how big a swing are you looking for? Because Hyatt is the home run swing, but he could be a total 0. Robinson, I think, will be something down the stretch, but I don't know if it's quite as. I mean, he's gonna be a part-time slot receiver, right? He's gonna have a 70%, 75% in a bull case route rate.
Yeah.
It's just hard for me to see him having a lot more than that coming off the ACL, but he could also just be their best wide receiver down the stretch.
I want to pull up this comment before we put a bow and recap this team. So Beastburst says, what do you guys think of drafting Levis in a build like this? He's referencing, of course, taking 2 Titans pass catchers. Seems like something we should be mixing in if you're double stacking the Titans. I disagree completely, because the whole point of Hopkins coming over is, I mean, I do not think Hopkins is signing up to go play for the Titans without some kind of assurance that Ryan Tannehill is going to be the quarterback. And so at this point, Levis to me feels like a redshirt guy. He doesn't even strike me, Pat, as like a Desmond Ridder. Oh, we'll see what he has the last 3 to 4 weeks of the season. Am I completely misreading that?
No, that's how, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're not going to see what they have if they're completely eliminated from playoff contention.
If they're awful, right?
Yeah. Like what Hopkins has a say. All these players are going to have a say as long as the team is good. You know what I mean? Like, let's come here, let's win games. Everything's optimistic now. But if they miss the playoffs, the whole thing was a failure. Hopkins didn't. I mean, he went there to get paid probably more than anything, but he also went there to try and win games. I mean, he's not joining a rebuild. And I think more importantly, why would the Titans bring him in if their plan is to rebuild this year? So I think their plan is to be competitive with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, but that plan could also blow up in their face. So I think there's still a decent chance that we do see Levis. And in some ways, I think, Tannehill versus Howell is kind of an interesting thing. It's like, I think Tannehill's a little bit more job security where, he's just been the quarterback there so long. We kind of know what he is. They trust him, but like he could absolutely get benched at the end of the year. Like he's got to win games.
Yes.
Or he will get benched.
And I guess that's why I think when you've made this bet on Hopkins and you've made this bet on Burks, you need the team to be good. If they start out the season 1-7 and Tannehill's a disaster, that team's already dead. Will Levis is not coming to save that team. So to me, when you are drafting Hopkins and Burks where they're going, you need it to be Tannehill and you need him to be good. I just think the use cases where Levis hits is like Tannehill gets hurt and Levis is just this shocking revelation that we all completely missed as a prospect. And so it's like, that's a pretty thin needle to thread.
I can't imagine drafting Levis. I think what I would say if you're thinking about drafting Levis is go take a look. Rotoviz has a good tool on advance rates from previous years, and you can go look and see what the advance rates were on quarterbacks who didn't start the year. And they're very low. They're very low because you don't take many quarterbacks on your team. You're taking like 3 at most, right? In an 18-round draft. Maybe you could get weird on DraftKings and take a 4th, but generally we're talking about 2 to 3 quarterbacks. If you're taking a guy who doesn't play until the very end of the season, that really hurts your team. Like structurally, it's almost like drafting a 1 quarterback team. There's only a few cases, like maybe if you had Mahomes and you wanted to go Levis, but even then I wouldn't do that. I just think the payoff is not worth the risk that you're taking on of just having that essentially 1 or 2 quarterback team for most of the year.
I actually like this thought that James brings up here. If you want to galaxy brain some Will Levis, do it in weekly winners. If you have that stack there and all of a sudden you are getting a guy who's not drafted in those contests, if you happen to get 4 to 5 starts from him at the end of the season, you get a big spike week with Burks or whatever. Now you actually have like a low owned stack. That's probably a good place if you want to do some galaxy brain there, because you can actually benefit from him being extremely low owned. All right, let's recap this team, Pat. I really like how this one shook out. I think when we do the overall thing, you could maybe say we're slightly weak at tight end, but otherwise I think we accomplished basically every objective I want to try to accomplish here. We have Daniel Jones, Matthew Stafford, and Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. All of them are double stacked with at least 1 bring back. Running backs, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, James Cook, Rashad Penny, Gus Edwards. Love Cook and Penny as RBs, 3s, 4s with the double anchor RB build. Wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, JSN, Treylon Burks, Gabe Davis, Zay Flowers, Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt. Tight ends, Dalton Schultz, Tyler Higbee. What do you think, Pat?
I like this team a lot. I think it's fun. And I guess we should check with Herzig on this, who's been kind of the most vocal on, but like having the 2 guys from the same game, but then we also have a 3rd game double stacked with a bring back with the quarterback. does that matter now? Because plus Jones and Stafford, I think, are just such good picks. I'm totally fine with this quarterback room, even though two of them do play each other in week 17.
Yeah, and because you're getting the individual stack benefits in weeks 15 and 16, which is still a very tough gauntlet. We got to finish 1 of 16, so having 3 different double stacks that give us chances in week 15 and 16 to get there, and then it's like, hey, we still have access to 2 games in the week 17 finals there. So yeah, I have no problem with that. When I look at like the value we got on some of these guys, the Zay Flowers dip in a wide receiver heavy room is fun. I do think Cook and Penny are like perfect RB3, RB4 types. And like I said, I think, and people in the chat said it too, a little weak at tight end. I agree. I think generally a third tight end could be comfy here. And the thing is, and Shawn's gotten me really good at this too, as far as being a little bit more position agnostic at the end of the draft. Like, we're not going to take Daniel Bellinger because we want to get a double stack with Jones and we want a third tight end. It's like, no, we're going to take the best possible player for that team bet, which was clearly a wide receiver.
Yes, exactly. I mean, to me, like, Schultz is also on the borderline where you can. I mean, and here's the thing about Higbee, right? Like, we're worried that Higbee will just block too much and not run enough routes because their offensive line was so bad last year, and that's one of the ways they tried to manage that situation. But there is no one on that roster who's challenging him at the tight end position. Like, he is locked in snap-wise as their true starter. And Schultz, if he's worth anything, is going to be running all the routes for the Texans. So, like, Schultz is either a terrible pick or like an acceptable 2 tight end guy.
And I think maybe I don't know what the word is, cognitive dissonance of like, could this be a 2 tight end build versus a 3? Not working under the illusion that Schultz and Higbee really have the potential to be a top 5 or top 6 tight end.
Right.
But they probably have really good paths to being top 12 tight ends with the amount of targets that they can earn. And in this build, if we're winning Best Ball Mania, Dalton Schultz and Tyler Higbee are both top 12 guys. And if that's the case, you can absolutely have a 2 tight end build with 2 top 12 tight ends.
And they're both correlated.
Yeah. Thank you. That put it on our tombstone, and they're both correlated here. Pat, what else do you got going on at Legendary Upside? Obviously, people, including myself, need to check out the marathon stream from yesterday. Anything else coming down the pike?
Yeah, check out the stream. It was a lot of fun. A lot of good guests, a lot of good banter. Had some really delightful banter between Liam and King Cap. That was some of the. I would recommend I think that was all in the start of that stream. So if you want to check out anything, I'd probably recommend that.
Was there any references to both of them being chess guys? Because King Cap has claimed that I think he can beat Liam at chess. Like, Cap is really good at chess, and so to me, like, maybe I should preside over some kind of best ball chess like draft prop bet between them. I think
I recommend getting those two on stream together.
Yeah.
Again. So if you want to, I would, I think the world needs more Chess Liam and Chess Cap.
I love that. I need to make that happen. Anything else people should be looking out for? You still got credits over on Underdog?
I still have credits over on Underdog. Yeah, if you sign up for a yearly subscription to Legendary Upside, you can get a $50 credit to Underdog. It takes about a week to hit your account, and you have to fill out a form on the site. At the top of the site, there's a tab called Perks/Discord. You go there, and you just fill out a short form. It gives them your email address and your Underdog username. And I send your username over to Underdog, and you get a credit for $50 in about a week. So considerable discount on the normal Legendary Upside price there if you're playing on Underdog.
Yep, take advantage of that. Head over. I do have the links down below, both to Pat's Legendary Upside YouTube channel if you want to watch that stream, as well as to his site. Even at the very least, I always say it, just get signed up for the email list. Pat does do a decent amount of free posts too, so you don't want to miss that. And then I have a feeling you're going to like what you see and then want to get subbed up to Legendary Upside. Appreciate Pat joining me here every Wednesday for the first draft on Best Ball Breakfast. Pat, I will see you later tonight for Ship Chasing, where we will naturally draft another Best Ball Mania team.
Of course. Later.
All right. Up next, RotoViz Shawn Siegele with the Best Ball Banana Stand. Shawn Siegele, welcome back to the Best Ball Banana Stand, a weekly show where RotoViz Shawn Siegele and me, Peter Overzet, draft a team in the shark-infested waters of Best Ball Mania 4 as we look to build a team that can take down that $3 million top prize, or who knows, maybe the $500,000 regular season top prize while we're at it. Shawn, how are you doing today?
Good. It's been kind of a crazy 48 hours. We had our first big monsoon here in Tucson, massive straight line winds, trees down everywhere, power lines down everywhere. It reminded me a little bit, and I'm sure you remember because it was just so noteworthy. I was on ship chasing 3 or 4 years ago, and Pat comes running in at the last second, and his face is all like he's in an action adventure or maybe horror movie. He's like, the water is pouring in through the door. And so we had a lot of that kind of thing. I mean, water coming through, sealed windows, the power's out overnight. I'm all set to do the show with Pat yesterday, apocalypse style, right? Got my battery, got my hotspot. Internet's still not on, so we'll see how that holds up. But then yesterday evening, half of the AC goes out, and it's going to be 110 today. So,
oh my God, Shawn.
If you start to see it stream down as we're recording here, it's getting a little warm.
Yeah, just let the record show that Shawn isn't getting nervous in these draft rooms. It's actually the literal heat. Those aren't nervous beads of sweat. Well, glad to know you're doing okay. So right now you're tapping in on hotspot Wi-Fi.
We are. So yeah, I'm excited for today. I got a little twist for you early on in the draft. If we get the right draft spot, We'll see if that works. I mean, it needs to be a pretty specific slot. So our chances of that aren't that great. But Ben and I released a Stealing Bananas that I really enjoyed recording with him. We go into it a little bit there. I mean, he and I are going to be doing a draft later this week as well. And so we'll probably try it. But again, you got to get the right spot. So we'll see if that happens. But yeah, I'm ready for some 110-degree best ball. Let's do it.
That's right. And anything, we're starting to get news flying kind of fast and furious here. We get some of these, like training camp pup things. We're getting some news on Pacheco, our guy, Kendre Miller. Any news that you're reacting to in a meaningful way, or is this kind of all more noise and fluff right now?
It's almost certainly noise. And yet you see that little blurb on Miller and you're looking at your exposures. And last week we drafted him for, we haven't done 100 drafts, but a lot of times. And I mentioned that maybe we weren't that strong yet at running back because we had some guys with some injury risks and a third string player. So we'll see how quickly he can move up that depth chart if he's not out there practicing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there start to be a bit of a discount here in drafts. Shawn, I did just hop us into a Best Ball Mania draft. I tipped people off in the Discord. Some of these have been just snap filling. Today, it looks like there were 6 spots available when I joined. So looks like we got some friends and family in here, Shawn. And we did draw the 1-3, which is where I just drafted with Pat in the fast draft or in the previous draft. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But see lots of familiar names here. So we will be battling with the wide receiver avalanche bros here, Shawn. Can you tip off? Does this draft slot accommodate your interesting wrinkle you wanted to throw at me?
It doesn't.
Okay.
I wanted us to do a big first round reach in order to pair a couple of guys that I think are extremely undervalued. And so if you get both of them, I mean, even though the ADP value is terrible, I think the actual value is good. And then maybe you have a little bit of a unique team, but the 103 is too early to make that kind of move.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if Shawn's pressing the brakes on an early reach, then it's probably a pretty big reach. Yeah, Pat and I started, we started with Cooper Kupp, and then Jonathan Taylor fell to us at pick 22, which we ran to the podium to select. So that was a fun combo to start here. Working under the assumption that this draft goes how all of the drafts go with Chase and Jefferson at the top. I know you like CMC. Do you prefer playing Kupp in these kind of rooms, or do you have another Galaxy Brain idea?
I probably like to play Kupp in these rooms. And I mean, he's obviously rising just slightly. People are getting a little bit more comfortable with maybe the injury situation there, just with how the offense is going to be, that the team won't be a train wreck, and a little bit maybe some things with Tyreek as well that have kind of flipped them back. But I mean, Cooper Kupp in a season that had a lot of struggles, and his peripherals fell off in a lot of different ways last year, which, I mean, they almost have to do after the 2021 season. But the actual number of fantasy points he scored were still insane. So, I mean, you could argue that he actually has to do less to justify a top 3 pick in terms of what do we have to do differently than what he's done in the past. Then certainly JaMarr Chase and perhaps even Justin Jefferson. You know, when you have this Rams team and you're looking at some of the guys that they play in the postseason, you're looking at the quarterback situation, it doesn't necessarily set up as dynamic a play otherwise as those top 4 receivers, other top 3 receivers. But I mean, in a vacuum, I really like that pick.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor not going to be sliding to us today. He goes at the 1-2 turn. I'm guessing that's where you think or maybe you even have him higher than that, but I would guess that you think JT at 13 is far more efficient than 22.
I do. You guys getting him at 22, that's pretty crazy. Obviously, there are scenarios where it doesn't work out, but I mean, I think that Jonathan Taylor could challenge some record books this season. So people getting him, even, you know, at the 1-2 turn, are getting potentially a much better value than Eckler, Robinson drafters, even though I like both of those picks as well.
Yeah. Someone had pointed out when Pat and I started Kupp and Taylor that you're getting, you know, last year's 101 and 102 there at much cheaper combined costs, it is fun to think about how quickly we forget, you know, why we were drafting Jonathan Taylor 101 in the first place, of what his profile can do. So, like buying those discount opportunities as they present themselves. We got some interesting starts here. Of course, some wide receiver starts. We get a Bijan, Jalen Waddle, an Eckler, Nick Chubb here. One thing I was talking with Pat too is just now, you know, some of these 3rd round RBs, maybe not quite as attractive as they were, with kind of the specter of Dalvin Cook looming with the Jets, looming with the Patriots, which we were talking about how that could potentially ding Hall or Stevenson. You got these holdout potential. Josh Jacobs seems very upset. We do have Tee Higgins fall here. And by fall, I mean slightly ahead of ADP. There's also Pollard, Stevenson, Breece Hall. Which angle do you like here?
I think we have to grab Higgins for some of those reasons that you mentioned. I mean, Pollard is absolutely electric, and yet probably one of the more overvalued players in that area. Pete, unless I completely misunderstood what was happening, and I was looking at the draft board, Rhamondre Stevenson in the draft that Pat and Eric and I did yesterday, I think he fell to 311. It was 310 or 311. And
yeah,
when we were really committed to a 0 RB team, and we did go with Samuel and Allen at the 3-4 turn, which obviously a lot of fun. But if you're going to get Stevenson at the 3-4 turn, that would have been pretty hard to pass up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that really goes back because last week we found ourselves in a similar spot too, where you're weighing, are you going to get cheaper versions of these guys, Breece Hall, Rhamondre? Because I think everyone agrees, if Dalvin Cook goes to one of those 2 teams, you're going to get cheaper prices on those backs. And yet you still find yourself in this ADP dead zone where you do then revert back to betting on the talent in those spots because there isn't any other truly viable pick. I do think we'll have some flexibility at this pick. We do see Tony Pollard come off right after Tee Higgins, which makes sense. Derrick Henry goes after him. Debo, a little reach there relative to ADP, but certainly viable here in avalanche rooms. You know, we do have the quarterbacks, Hurts and Allen, the aforementioned Rhamondre, Breece, Jacobs, Keenan. I'm curious which way you want to go here.
Unless you are feeling like Stevenson has a really good shot of getting hit. I mean, I think when you don't have a clear wide receiver, then even early in 3, and he's one of those guys with the profile that, I mean, in most seasons, and I think you could argue in this season, if their offense hadn't been so bad last year, because he is the perfect profile in terms of a big guy who creates the additional yards that you want through contact, which obviously coaches love. That generates more workload for the back going forward. I mean, they go into the games with this plan to have committees, and in many cases, you get committees that are frustrating because the team is taking the better player off the field. You get a lot of rhetoric right now, or just throughout the offseason, about Travis Etienne coming off a lot and how much the Jaguars are going to try and save him. And for, a slightly smaller back, even though Etienne isn't tiny, you do see that happen. But when you have Stevenson out there gashing defenses, creating yards after contact, it's so difficult for the team to take him off the field. Then he's a plus receiver. And once that offense takes a step forward, and I really think that it will, they have a lot better pieces in place for this season. You have that potential for him to really change what was kind of a touchdown issue last year. I mean, all the backs, when you look at them, they're not going to get that Jamal Williams 2022, but you add a bunch of touchdowns for Stevenson, and suddenly, he's scoring like a top 5 player. Even in 2023, you're not getting a lot of running backs in a spot where you're flat and thinking, who am I going to go with, that have that top 5 upside.
Yeah. And to me, like, my whole thought was the reason he's in the 3rd round is because people are afraid of Bill Belichick running back by committee shenanigans. And yet we know Rhamondre is going to be the most talented, the most explosive, and still lead that backfield. Like, I thought the committee concerns were priced into this ADP, because if you were signing up for bell cow Rhamondre Stevenson, 20 plus touches a game for 17 games, he'd be a top 5 pick. And so that's why I'm like, okay, even if Dalvin goes there, yeah, is that great for him? No. Or if another back is getting touches, which we know is going to happen regardless, it seems like that's mostly priced in right now.
And unless something pretty devastating happens, then, it's going to be tough for guys like Nick Chubb, like Saquon Barkley, to actually outscore him. And where you have to take them, there are still some other players, especially when you're expecting a wide receiver avalanche draft, that are probably better options. And like you mentioned, with some of these backs that are upset, if you do get Barkley missing some time or just not 100%, you just really can't afford for these guys to miss time, then come in and immediately get injured, which, injuries are a risk for everybody, but the players who maybe are putting themselves at risk of slightly greater injury chances, that does make it tough if they're already a tricky pick where they're going.
So one thing that I think is always interesting here when you have the chance at Joe Burrow is, one, I highly doubt that the drafter from the 2 hole who has Chase is going to pass on Burrow twice at 47 and 50. So if we want Burrow, we probably have to take him at 46. But then the next thing you start to run into as we see all these wide receivers coming off the board, do we have the stomach for multiple detours? Because we might like a running back who falls here. You and I have also taken a decent amount of TJ Hockenson. So how are you thinking through the potential double detour away from wide receiver here? Where does Burrow factor into these plans? Obviously, it depends who falls to us at 46, but those are the things racking around in my brain right now.
Well, just think back to the most recent draft where start wide receiver time is 4 yesterday, and then we get Bateman, so you get to 5, but then you're still there like in the 16th, 17th, 18th rounds. It's so difficult to fill out even when you start very wide receiver heavy. So I think that unless there is a Kansas City player that we also really like and are targeting later, that it makes it a difficult selection. But we're also in a position here where I do think that the wide receivers are trickier picks. Now, I think that Chris Godwin is undervalued. In an avalanche, you can definitely pick him here. We've done that before. I just mentioned what I think some of the risks for ETN are, but once you get to this range of the draft, I do think it's pretty interesting. I think those 3 guys for me are pretty even in terms of what we should do.
ETN, Burrow, or Godwin?
Yeah.
Let's go ETN. We won't get Burrow. There you go. Travioli in the chat doesn't want us to take Burrow. You know what? We're feeling nice today. You get your guy, Joe Burrow. Let's grab ETN here. Slides 5 picks past ADP. I've been liking some of these kind of like double anchor builds from different spots of the board. I did one on Monday where Mixon and Kenneth Walker fell to me at the 5-6 turn and was able to build a really fun team around that. So Rhamondre, ETN remain a pretty fun pairing here. And because I think we're going to like the wide receivers similarly here, I don't mind. And it does look like Godwin might come back. We also take JSN a ton. You can see I'm double the field on both of those guys. And I do have Shawn's and RotoViz's blended ranks pulled in today. So we're not drafting exclusively off ADP. Is Godwin the play? You mentioned him at the previous pick.
I think so, to make sure that we do kind of keep up here at the wide receiver position. Ayuk, though, might be another way to play it if you prefer that.
I have been wanting to boost up my Ayuk. You can see I'm only here at 6.6, gives us outs to
Let's do that.
quarterback. Let's do Ayuk there.
In part because the Kupp situation, again, is one that we're not necessarily looking to play. And so Ayuk is more fun from that perspective than Godwin.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah. So our team now through 5 rounds, Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Rhamondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Brandon Ayuk. And it is like going back to the Burrow thing. And, you know, I've been thinking about this too. And I'm working on a video right now with Michael Dubner, and it's going to be called How to Combat the Wide Receiver Avalanche. And I should be recording that in the next few days. And I'm using one of the teams we drafted as an example and talking about how if you can push QB and push tight end, you can accomplish 2 objectives, which is 1, keeping pace with wide receiver, and 2, scooping up running value in mispriced players that have really high upside. And so I do think it requires a little bit of patience. It's hard to be like, well, I can stack Joe Burrow with Tee Higgins. I'm supposed to do that. I'm always told I'm supposed to do that. But if you can build out players that give you avenue to later quarterbacks, you can really build a monster team that I think is unique to the 2023 draft landscape based on where these values of late QBs and late tight ends are. And it doesn't mean you want 100% exposure to it, but in our drafts together, I have really found that those punt builds are the best way to attack these avalanches.
And that was part of the fun exercise that Ben and I went through too, and looking at the back half of the first round and the early part of the second round at how, you know, where are the warts on these profiles? What's the upside? But then also, are certain players far more effective at doing what you just mentioned? And so I think right from the beginning, you're trying to figure out how many paths you can create so that you don't have to go with the early QB if it doesn't fit perfectly. So you don't have to go with the early tight end. Larry Andrews just released an article yesterday looking at elite tight end versus late tight end, and maybe say late and 3 tight end, why 2023 might be different at the tight end position. Now, it's an interesting debate because also you're getting some very good values on the star tight ends. But that portion of it, I think, is a lot of fun to think through. And then especially you get so many of these avalanche drafts that you get so much practice in working through what happens when the draft gets a little bit more wide receiver heavy and how do you have to defeat that. One of the things that I ran into in one of my drafts recently was this situation where I did do double anchor because of flat spots at wide receiver, but then like the 2 guys that I think you have to draft in that 7 through 9 range at running back also hit in ranges where I just didn't really have a receiver. So I end up with what you might call a modified robust RB draft, which I mean, that's not what we're going for. Yeah.
James Cook and Javonte Williams.
That's definitely one of them.
DeAndre Swift and Javonte Williams.
There you go. You can't pass on those guys. You can't pass.
There you go. No,
and then so it ends up with that late wide receiver build, which we've talked about isn't as effective. But I did get to roll out those 5 receivers that we've talked about late. 9 wide receivers on that particular team. That's very different than what I normally do. But again, I mean, these 2023 draft environments are so fun because they give you some of those opportunities where, I mean, are you going to ever draft even modified robust RB in almost any other draft environment? I mean, probably not. And the data doesn't suggest that it works, but there are some times this season where if you get the perfect run of players, then I think you have to go for the most talented guys and then know where your pivots are to make those structures work.
Yeah. And that is, you know, I was going to see if we had an interesting conversation here. If Kyle Pitts slipped to us at 70, that would have definitely been a guy I would have been willing to break structure to make sure that we get as much upside into our roster as possible. We're about to pick here at 6'10", looking at your ranks, which are fairly in line with ADP here. We see Burks, the aforementioned Swift, Pickens, Dotson, Quentin Johnston. So a lot of different options here for us. What's the pick for you here?
Well, we can put Dotson on the other side of that Ayuk selection. And he is the most expensive of those three receivers who are probably in the mix. So for this pick, that probably makes sense. And then there are 3 to 4 guys as we wrap back around that I think would be in the conversation at the 703.
Yeah, so our team here, we do select Jahan Dotson. Our wide receiver room, Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jahan Dotson. Running backs, Rhamondre Stevenson and Travis Etienne. And then, we'll see what comes back to us here. I like, 3-4 guys here available. So I think we're going to, sometimes in these rooms, Shawn, we do find ourselves reaching from ADP just because the pockets don't line up with kind of how we're building. This draft, I think, is coming together fairly nice. Although we're going to have kind of a tough decision here, because I think between Quentin Johnston's, George Pickens, and DeAndre Swift, I think you could make a case for any of those guys here. Where are you leaning?
Well, Pickens plays off of Higgins in 16, which is interesting if we're trying to go through the tournament. It also opens up another cheap breakout QB. I mean, we draft that QB quite frequently, but because there are really strong reasons to, both in terms of breakout and structurally. I don't know that we need Swift in this. It would be a little bit early. If Burks had come through, that would have been an interesting discussion as well, because I think you can make a pretty strong pitch that his situation is as good, or I don't want to say necessarily say better. I think that it widens the range of outcomes for him. And obviously that range was extremely wide to start with, because you have a player who was a great prospect, but really struggled as a rookie. And so those two things are directly in conflict in terms of how we would project him then going forward. But with all of the rave reviews, then you go back to the situation where, I mean, the move for Hopkins puts the Titans, I think, really in the mix in the AFC. It decreases the chance you're going to get a terrible quarterback late in the season. That helps Burks. You expect Hopkins to draw coverage. That helps Burks. They still don't have really other targets to siphon the additional. So if it's concentrated, it'll be interesting to track Burks in drafts. Have you seen him move in ways that you find surprising since the Hopkins signing, or no?
It's funny because this is one of the classic, in my drafts, he continues to go at or around ADP, partly because I'm the one selecting him there. I have heard whispers that he is sliding though in some draft rooms. And yeah, my take has been kind of similar. I think it's neutral at worst and probably a boost for them. On both Monday's stream, Shawn, and with Pat, I did the Treylon Burks, DeAndre Hopkins double stack there, where I'm excited about that offense. I'm excited about what the kind of relative security of Ryan Tannehill playing the whole season brings to that offense. And I do think they can be very, very fun. And all of those concerns of, him losing some target share, I do think can be offset by overall team efficiency, more red zone trips, more big plays. So yeah, I'm excited about the Titans this year. And I have a big position on Burks, and it will probably get much bigger if he is actually sliding in drafts.
And so when you take Hopkins and Burks together, they're awesome. When you take Hopkins and Burks together, did you take Tannehill at the end? Did you have a Houston player that you really like in that situation coming back off of that play?
So both times this week, I did take Tannehill as the third quarterback. On Monday, I think someone was having fun sniping my Houston bringbacks because John Mechie went in the 13th round and Robert Woods, I believe, went in the 15th round. So I did settle for a Tank Dell share. I was like, you know what? At least you're not going to force me to draft Robert Woods. I take Tank Dell. And then Pat and I, we had a punt tight end build going, and Dalton Schultz was there for us at a good price. And so we thought that one lined up pretty well there. So yeah, I kind of, I think what you're hinting at too is like, if you're playing that double stack, like you need that game going pretty nuclear there and wanting a Houston piece to help you out.
I think you do. And I think it's also tricky because there's a lot of potential for that spot to be more or less a throwaway pick for the vast majority of the season and knock down your playoff advance. Now, I say that as someone who drafts a lot of injury risk players. And so I'm no stranger to picking some guys who might torpedo your team, but I do think that part of it is interesting. And so I think finding out from people who they really like there on the Texans is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good discussion. I don't think you and I have talked about Nico Collins a lot. I've noticed he is following a similar trajectory of, say, Sky Moore and Romeo Dobbs, of drafters feel behind the 8 ball at wide receiver. They need someone in these 8th, 9th, 10th rounds, and they are kind of the now preferred next gen of double-digit wide receivers who are getting pushed up. But I don't know if I've gotten your Nico Collins take too much.
He's one of those players where I think that the overall view doesn't have enough production to think that he consolidates as a star, which makes it trickier in a weak offense and at the prices. So I haven't been on him a ton, even though, I mean, if he hits, he could hit in a big way at that price. And then you'd really like some of the things that Houston is doing.
We got 16 seconds here, Shawn. Do you want to play this through a running back? You and I select James Cook a ton. Anyone else jumping out to you here?
I think probably Cook is the preferred play.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if there was anything else there. Cook, back-to-back draft selecting James Cook here. We take him right at ADP. Get a little week 17 angle there with Rhamondre and James Cook playing against each other. I just didn't see any other things really screaming at me. And now we're going to probably have a couple different directions we could take this pick at 9-3. Our team through 8 rounds: Rhamondre, Travis Etienne, James Cook at running back. Wide receivers: Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens. So definitely doing a good job outside of Joe Burrow. All of our quarterbacks paired with our wide receivers are still available on the board. And now we can kind of think what gives us the best path here in the early 9th.
So Perine is always interesting to play off of all of those Javonte Williams shares. Make sure that one way or the other I mean, there are still other scenarios. We're neither one of them, but I like both of those profiles. You can play it that way. One of the things I really try and do is get the running backs and the tight ends and the quarterbacks at ADP value to offset some of the wide receiver reaches for correlation. It wouldn't be ADP value on Freiermuth, but he's pretty interesting in a build where we don't have a tight end and we do have Pickens. So those are probably my leading contenders for this selection.
Yeah. Do you have a preference? I guess when I start, I've kind of been liking Perine a little bit more in 0 RB-ish builds without the earlier running back. So I slightly lean Freiermuth. Are you good with that?
Yeah, let's go that route.
How do you think about that? Because that might be a blind spot of how I process that stuff, where it's like, I look at guys where, like, say, Brian Robinson, Samaje Perine, AJ Dillon, where maybe I'm not as excited about maybe their breakout potential to just be a stone crush, like, league winner. But I do feel good about their ability to get touches out of the gate, to fall into the end zone, to have a role and really kind of buoy a weak running back room until our Kendre Millers hit later in the season. I've been putting Perine in that bucket, just bracing for the inevitability of Javonte Williams. But do you think about Perine through a different lens, where he could be a have your cake and eat it too guy, where he's big down the stretch too?
I think so, because even we tend to focus so much on these injured running backs, where the real concern is how early do we get points, and are we going to get the true version of the guy? But you can have the guy come back in week 2, 3, have a great run, and then get injured again and set up for the finish to the season that we got from guys like Penny and Sony Michel and Devin Singletary 2 years ago. And I mean, Perine is such a good fit for what offenses do. He's a little bit like a rich man's Fournette, in that he can do everything. And with Perine, you're actually getting a tiny bit of talent on top of that. And then it's the perfect offense. And so the biggest concern that I would have there is actually Russell Wilson. And if he neutralizes what has always been a very fantasy friendly situation with Sean Payton.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And I think Perine gives you just so many outs too, right? Where he's going to have a role even when Javonte Williams is back. But there are, neither of us want to envision a world where Javonte Williams isn't smashing down the stretch, but where, he gets dinged up again, where he's not ready. I mean, I feel pretty confident that Sean Payton is going to have no problem saddling up Perine with a near bell cow level role. So it's almost like sometimes I get caught up about thinking about contingent upside in one direction, but not the other. And I do think Perine offers it in pretty much both ways.
I hope so. I think so. One of the things that's been so interesting to track, and you mentioned Mixon at the 5-6 turn, is that situation with Cincinnati, because very clearly they preferred Perine in the key moments at the end of the year last year. And it was really only a matter of Mixon getting touches in certain situations because he'd always been the guy, because he had the contract, because you don't want to necessarily completely upset the apple cart, kind of the path that you've created to that point. So pluses for Perine, some concerns for Mixon. We're seeing those play out in two different teams. That part I think is really interesting. You get back to the pick that we made, and even though any single digit tight end, I do want to get at great ADP value, as I mentioned. In this particular team where we had, again, Kupp in the first round and then Higgins in the second, and one guy isn't interesting from a QB perspective and the other one you're very quickly locked out of, we've set up for 3 quarterbacks. If we can make those 3 quarterbacks as inexpensive as possible or create less pressure on ourselves, and by selecting the second piece there, I mean, you're probably going to get Pickett at a good price. There are no guarantees.
Yeah, no guarantees there, but certainly plenty of outs. Even our guy, Mac Jones, becomes viable in this build too. So hopefully we will not get completely boxed out at quarterback. And, the other thing too is we've kind of learned in these rooms, sometimes, I know you said wanting to get these guys as cheap as possible, but sometimes also the opportunity cost isn't that bad, in rounds 15, 16, if you need to reach, especially if you have in your back pocket some of those other super late picks that don't always get drafted. And I know we'll probably have a couple of those in play here. So our team through 9 rounds, we're about to pick at the end of the 10th round, no quarterbacks yet, but we do have Rhamondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, and James Cook at running back. Our wide receivers, we got that 5 through 75 picks. That always feels good. Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jahan Dotson, and George Pickens. Tight end, Pat Freiermuth. This team kind of feels like a play in the hits team for us, Shawn. I feel like these are some clicks we've made together a decent amount, but I don't feel as panicked and scrambly as we sometimes do in these rooms.
Sure, and this team is just set up so nicely. One of the reasons why you didn't need to take Perine at the last shot was that when you have the 2 early running backs that you like, and then you think that James Cook has a lot of room to the upside, you don't have to take that 4th running back, so you get a potentially elite tight end. And with Freiermuth, I think that his breakout opportunity is probably a little bit underpriced. One of the things we talk about a lot with the late tight ends is that we want them to have both a volume and a breakout path. But that's also true for these guys who are being drafted in that 8, 9, 10, 11 range. Unless you think the player is a potential league winner, you don't want to take a tight end in that range.
Yep. I don't see anything at wide receiver here. I've heard you wanting to boost your A-chain exposure. I've felt similarly. He is at the top of the ranks and at ADP here. Anything else interesting beyond A-chain for you?
I don't think so. Not here. There's a potential interesting reach pick as we come back around.
Okay. Yeah, let's take A-chain here as well. I do think we can talk it through here after we get the pick, but we had A-chain, and another guy who I think is a very nice selection as like a running back 3 or running back 4 here in this build where we have Rhamondre and Etienne anchoring things. This is the part of Shawn where I feel like your ranks that I'm seeing on screen like deviate more from ADP, where I'm more like, wait, where are the guys that are normally up here that I'm staring at? But of course, Juju buried in the ranks here naturally. But I'm curious to see what direction you want to go here, because since we are on a trajectory of kind of later quarterbacks, and because this wide receiver range is pretty desolate, it does kind of push us in like the running back tight end range, unless you're seeing something otherwise. Yeah.
So we have Dulcich as a riser. It doesn't necessarily fit as well with Freiermuth, because then you're not necessarily positioning yourself to take advantage of those great values late, but you do then have 2 guys who could be tournament winning tight ends as opposed to simply kind of get you through. If you have 2 tournament winning tight ends, I think that is interesting. Meyers is not somebody that I'm necessarily wanting to target, but I think he's a great pick a ton of the time.
this was a late, I mentioned that we were playing the hits at the last second there. You gave a strong, quick pitch for Jakobi, and I said, screw it. Let's throw Jakobi in there at 123, right at ADP there. How do you talk to me more about Jakobi at that spot?
Well, he's somebody who has always been a very good target earner for them. You move to an offensive coordinator, obviously familiar with you, wants to use you there. He's been part of my thesis against drafting Devontae Adams at the 1-2 turn, because I do think when you look at the insane number of routes that Mac Hollins ran last year and his inability to draw targets, even though you have the kind of the splash plays that, stick in the mind, and you're thinking like, that guy actually played pretty well last year. And then you go through and look at his ability to do the things that Josh McDaniels wants. And you're like, that's the reason why this offense is moving in a different direction. I think you have a potential for some Devontae Adams disgruntlement too. That, I don't think he's going to go out and, we always say go out and do what Allen Robinson did a couple years ago, but maybe Allen Robinson was just done. Maybe it wasn't a thing of like he quit on the Bears, because he clearly didn't look very good last year with the Rams either. But Meyers is somebody that you can have a little bit of that volume bet, but because he hasn't been really a sexy play in the past, he falls to this level in drafts that it simply doesn't make any sense based on his profile. And the Raiders are not going to be good. They're going to need to chase. They're in an offense. They're in a division that should have a lot of shootouts. I'm always looking for the extreme upside plays as we put these rosters together. And so Meyers doesn't appeal to me as much from that perspective. But at a certain point, when a guy is this undervalued to what he is, put in the stat box, you've got to consider layering him into some drafts.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Do you have you selected any Jimmy Garoppolo with Jakobi Meyers, or does he not fit your criteria for a late round QB selection, even if you got the correlation boost?
Well, let me ask you what you are hearing on him when you are working through all of the news. And I know that you're one of the people who kind of is the most informed in terms of everything that's going on. How confident should we be in Jimmy Garoppolo playing a full season here for the Raiders?
Yeah, I think I have not seen a lot of updates. I saw the initial fear, but now I feel like we're getting a situation where the market is kind of still anchored to kind of what was the previous news. And so I do wonder if Jimmy Garoppolo starts to become a little bit interesting. The thing that you have to ask yourself, though, is like, is there a path to upside here? Because I think you can even maybe ding a guy like Brock Purdy, who has far better weapons than Jimmy Garoppolo, and say, like, what's the true upside here? If he's not running a lot, I think compared to some of those other guys that we get a little bit more excited about. So that's my question. I have less concern about Jimmy Garoppolo not playing when we need him to play the last 8 to 9 weeks of the season than I do just wondering, does he have the necessary upside compared to a guy like Desmond Ridder, who's free and has better weapons? That's what I struggle with Garoppolo.
Yeah, I think that we have to, if we're going to go with the late QBs, we've got to bet on the weapons. We've got to bet on a little bit of hybrid ability. I had the shot to take Garoppolo really late in SFB in a situation where the quarterbacks that I've drafted, of course, are Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder. So even looking at that and thinking that a third solid QB makes a lot of sense, just keep passing, because that play doesn't necessarily interest me. I think that even though we obviously don't have it set up on this team, a Ryan Tannehill play is a lot better than a Jimmy Garoppolo play.
Yes. And we are about to pick. So we did take Jakobi Meyers there at the last pick. I was saying, how far did our guy Dulcich slide after we passed on him? Okay, he went at pick 131 there. Nice selection there. We are about to be on the clock. TTP does take Kendre Miller, so we don't get to play the hits there. Still have some tight ends that we like at the top here, some running backs, some wide receivers. What do you see?
I don't think any of those running backs are great fits for what we're doing here. I don't know that Russell Wilson is. You and I have drafted Kmet a lot together. In Blair's article, there are some notes that actually got me a little bit more excited about him again. Obviously, that locks us out of the late pick. It's never too early to take Marvin Mims and kind of just get that last sort of fun wide receiver, even though, there are some issues with his path to even routes, much less targets. Cole Kmet, I think with Kmet, you're going to get a very significant role in the offense, and then he's moving more in a breakout direction than people think. If you're talking about the Bears, and if they do take that step, then Kmet, you're not going to get probably the massive spike games that you got from Hockenson, but if you flatten that out a little bit, but again, you think of Kmet as a guy who can be a big touchdown scorer, even though he started his career with that as a big weakness. I mean, Kmet could be 2023 Hockenson.
Wow. Yeah, we haven't got to talk about that one a lot. I'm generally only taking Kmet, in like Justin Fields, or sometimes when I have Atlanta guys and then need a tight end. I think Cole Kmet has been fun, but I haven't taken him like in a vacuum like this at ADP. So I'm excited to dig in. And you said Blair had a piece up, kind of getting us hyped about Cole Kmet. We can talk about that in a sec. We are on the clock. You mentioned Mims here. Anything else stand out to you?
I don't think those running backs, again, don't look like good fits or good prices. Do we have any deeper wide receivers that you like than Mims here?
Let's see here. I mean, Chark would be if we wanted to give ourselves outs to another quarterback. But other than that, it seems like Mims is probably our guy.
Yeah, and I've been missing on Mims most of the time recently. It's fun to have him on this team. And I think especially on a team here, Mims is actually one of these guys where it's a little bit of a weird argument that you maybe are going to be pushed a little bit more to take him on teams where you have gotten locked out, or maybe you do some kind of a modified, robust RB, or in a situation where you take both an elite quarterback and an elite tight end. And as a result of that, you're not able to take as many of the wide receivers early. That can be a little bit problematic because there are scenarios where his role in the first half of the season is very weak. And so then you're paying that price on a team where you actually need wide receiver routes in the first half of the season. I think on a team here where the first five especially, but this wide receiver group looks very strong to me, both in terms of floor and then ceiling, you can work through that first half. And Mims is a fun final receiver who has that tournament upside for you.
Yeah, for sure. I generally have like Mims, obviously the guy I was hammering super early in drafts, and then it's been hard. I think if I looked at my exposures, it was like, the majority of my Mims shares came through my first 40 to 50 drafts, then was not getting a lot of him. So don't mind doubling back around to get some more Mims exposure. Also plays New England in week 15 there as well with our Rhamondre bet. And if we end up building out anything around the Patriots. So through 13 rounds here, a 0-4-7-2 build, no quarterbacks yet. Our running backs, Rhamondre, Travis Etienne, James Cook, Devon Achane. Our wide receivers, we got 7 of them now. Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Jakobi Meyers, Marvin Mims, and our 2 tight ends, Pat Freiermuth and Cole Kmet. Looking good here, Shawn. We have how many more picks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 more picks here as we land this plane.
And this is really the perfect structure if you're comfortable with late in 3 or even late in 2. The interesting thing about the robust RB team that I drafted was that it actually didn't set up well for the third QB. And so I didn't force that, even though the first 2 QBs were fairly weak. With that one, you have to go ahead and then make the case to yourself that for this team to work, even though I took 2 late QBs, the reason I took them is because they fit this team and they had the breakout upside. If they break out, there's no reason to throw away a third pick on the QB position just because I often make these 3 QB builds. I still have to have those last couple of wide receivers. If the wide receivers are much better fits, go ahead and take those guys. So that was a team that was weirdly and probably unfortunately built around the Falcons. And so as opposed to taking an uncorrelated QB without rushing upside in the 18th, go ahead and take Chase Claypool opposite that extreme Falcon stack. So that was the way that I want to do that. So even if we get stuck at QB, I think we can stick with just 2. So we want to keep that in mind, but obviously we have it set up so we can take more guys than that if the draft falls properly.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that was something I was thinking about last week where I was kind of mad at myself for tacking on Desmond Ridder as our third QB, despite having no correlation. And, something I kind of feel strongly about with the third QBs, and even Leone's research has backed this up, of like the benefit of the third QB is not because you're covering your bases or whatever. It's the fact that you're able to line up a third stack, which is really helpful the way these playoff gauntlets work. And so the power of that third QB, you'd rather have a 2 QB build if you don't have that stack. And so I'm mad at myself, Shawn, of not getting our late round pick that I know you were pushing us to last week. And I got itchy fingers there looking at our weak quarterback room. So we will not make that mistake again today. We will draft like we are right here, and we are about to be on the clock at the end of the 14th round at pick 166. Sam Laporta finally comes off here at pick 163. Nice little value for our guy Harb Sniper here, who gets Jared Goff at 139. And then Laporta 2 rounds later there. Shawn, let's take a peek at the board. The drafters behind us both only have one quarterback. I do think this should probably be a quarterback pick here for us and not mess around unless you're seeing something else.
No, I mean, Curtis Samuel is an interesting selection, but not necessary for this team. I mentioned that I like to really push on the QB, and it'd be interesting to actually just throw Pickett all the way through. But since there isn't another slam dunk pick, I mean, you're not going to try and push the quarterback all the way through when you have a flat area, and especially when you have the 2 guys.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, if we had a guy that fell to us that we were really excited about, do it. If we didn't, we also reached for Freiermuth too. So it's like we've made this pretty big stand on this this Pittsburgh thing. So I think Pickett there, and still right around ADP, not like a massive reach here. And I'm guessing we will like our options. Stafford does come off the board, which I basically, from kind of reading between the lines when you've talked, that you don't have much interest, even when you have Kupp in Stafford. He just doesn't fit your kind of criteria for quarterbacks you like to select.
He doesn't. And yet, I mean, if you get him at an absurd value, which I do think is possible in some drafts, because I mean, really, if you don't have Cooper Kupp, then I really struggle with the idea of taking Stafford. I think that you could push him into 16, into 17, and then it becomes a little bit more interesting. I mean, you could argue that for Kupp to do what we need to do, that you got to have to Stafford, and he could bounce back to that MVP-ish type of season. I'd prefer to play it different ways.
What do you like here, Shawn? We're on the clock at the top of your ranks. Mostert, Chuba Hubbard, Tyquan Thornton, Tajay Spears. What jumps out to you?
Well, let's go. I know that you have the big exposure there, but let's go with Spears.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty flat on all of these guys. Raheem Mostert, 14.3%, Chuba, 15.4%, Spears, 15.4%. We go ahead and grab Tajay Spears, who I do think is a very fun running back to add on here. It gets us to 5 running backs: Rhamondre, Etienne, James Cook, Devon Achane, Tajay Spears. And we're at a 1-5-7-2 build here with 3 more picks to go: 16, 17, 18. Definitely going to be adding at least one more quarterback, but I would say a decent amount of flexibility, Shawn, with what we do with these last 2 picks.
Yeah, and this is a cool spot to be in. It's difficult. One of the things that's been so fun about drafting these teams with you, drafting in general, the 2023 season, is that the puzzle is so complex, and the objectives that you have as a drafter in many ways are in conflict. And then you're drafting against 11 other people who are also trying to execute the perfect team. It's tough to accomplish everything you want in a draft. And then certainly on top of that, to be heading for your final 3 picks and feel like you have some flexibility. That's difficult to accomplish. I like where we are from that perspective because, like you say, have to have one more QB, but the other 2 picks could really be best player available, which, I mean, that unlocks us to go in a lot of different directions. I love that.
Yeah, and Pat and I had a similar dynamic with our last draft there too, where, I think we had maybe positionally we're weakest at tight end, but when we were looking at our objectives of what we were doing, and we had a Daniel Jones team, the wide receivers, all 3 of the late Giants wide receivers were available there. And it's just like, it's nice to be able to make the best possible pick when you realize. And I get tripped up on this too, because I definitely get dialed into structures, and I like making sure I'm allocating my draft capital correctly and recognizing where I'm strong and where I'm weak. And yet at the same time, we have to also acknowledge that the hit rates on all of these players, going after rounds 13, 14 are very low. And so you do need to be very player specific, very archetype specific, and make sure you aren't burning spots, which is, I fall into that trap sometimes with burning spots for correlation, burning spots for structural reasons. And I think one thing that I enjoy about drafting with you is you really push me toward, hey, the marginal differences in structure here at the end aren't a big deal. And we just need to get the best possible players that give us, tournament winning upside.
That's a huge part of what I am trying to do. You always hear people joking about, 0 bad players as a response to, 0 RB or other different types of ways to approach it. And I agree very strongly with that. I mean, I think 0 RB actually pushes you in that direction. And a lot of times, the thing that I have to fight for myself is to not throw away picks on guys who are injured, like Wandale, which I mean, we've picked him a lot. I do think that the late in 3 at QB, late in 3 at tight end is fantastic, especially right now. Once we get late in draft season, then I think round 17 and 18 will firm up, and we can take some of those correlation plays at wide receiver. We can take some of those 0 RB, deep shots and really feel like our chances of hitting are good. The flip side of it is just that, when you're trying to win a tournament, that elite QB and that elite tight end, they can give you that trump card. So you have to balance those two elements. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to be very intentional in terms of how we set the team up so that the quarterbacks that we are selecting late, the tight ends that we are selecting late. One of the fun discussions I've had, I think, with 3 or 4 different co-managers recently is about Michael Mayer, who is somebody who, just seems very undervalued. And so you draft him in round 18 until maybe we get this camp news and he jumps up to Sam Laporta prices. And then at those prices, you're not as interested for the same reasons that, we discussed that Jakobi Meyers and the Raiders offense might have some struggles. So I think that part is fascinating and just so interesting as we put these teams together.
We are on the clock here. I think this should probably be a quarterback pick, unless a tight end that you think might not fall. That I think is also viable now that I look at these ranks and our team construction. What do you think's the angle here?
I think it probably is QB. Do you prefer Purdy or locking in Howell for sure?
I've been liking to try to balance out some of my heavy Howell bags with some Purdy where it makes sense. And, where we took Ayuk where he did. Are you good with the Purdy selection there?
I am.
And so now we do kind of find ourselves in this spot where we do have a lot of flexibility. We had Kenny Pickett and Brock Purdy. So I guess the first question, are you comfortable with those guys in a 2 QB build, or do you think getting the third in this structure makes sense?
I'm comfortable with it. I do like taking Howell with that group because if you could get 2 out of 3 hits, I think it's going to really help your playoff advance. And we want to get as many teams through as possible. If we have 2 of the 3 guys who are really firing hot at the point in time that the tournament rolls around too, then you have a couple of different guys who could be that player who's good enough to pull you through the first couple of weeks and then give you the chance to win the whole thing. You're not trying to draft that third quarterback to just cover some points and to get some low scores. You're drafting that third QB because you think that, as you said, that he could be a true difference maker, a true tournament winner. If you're going late in 3, it's still really not a matter of managing the weekly scoring. It's a matter of putting those guys together such that you're launching the entire team. Now, there's an argument to be made that we'll just draft 2 of them in this draft, 2 of them in that draft, 2 of them in that draft. You hit the right draft. I do think that knocks down your playoff advance at least a little bit when the prices are this, when the opportunity cost is so little. And then if you have the 3 hits, which might be optimistic, then again, your chance in the tournament really jumps because you have 3 different ways to play it. One of the things I was looking at there just a little bit, it would be just a tiny, tiny consideration. But as we think about how the playoff structure works and maybe even taking Howell first and then not taking Purdy would be that week 15 game opposite Kupp. And so if we're trying to put this team through into the final 2 weeks and be in with the big dogs there, you're thinking that game shoots out, Kupp goes off, Howell goes off, and then you're through into week 16. But then once we're through, you have Purdy, you have Pickett, those guys can be potentially the winners for it. I guess my point is I really like, if it's set up properly, to have 3 players who could be huge. And you could argue that Pickett has been falling in a lot of the drafts I see. I mean, Purdy mostly goes ahead of him in the recent ones that I've done. I mean, Purdy has the shot to be, Matthew Stafford from a couple years ago plus. And one of the things that we're looking at with this 49ers offense is you think the run heavy nature of it, and they're going to set everything up with these dynamic weapons and they're going to run. But when you have McCaffrey there too, you have the chance for a lot of these short receiving touchdowns. We tend to think about Purdy as a guy who they liked better than Garoppolo. They liked better than Lance. He played well, but he'll take a step back. The offense will be very dynamic, but not explosive. There's a scenario where, he's a top 6 or 7 QB. And so you just have to be invested in at these prices and play that week 17 game, which, off the top of your head, you're not really thinking that 49ers Commanders is going to shoot out. We're playing it as though it is.
Couple housekeeping notes. If you guys are listening to this on the RotoViz podcast feed, you can check out the video companion for all these streams on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Peter Overzet. I'm streaming all 150 of my Best Ball Mania drafts. I draft with Shawn every Wednesday, along with Pat Perine, who won Best Ball Mania. I draft solo on Mondays. I draft in other spots throughout the week. So you can check out the playlist if you want to get access to all of those streams. And if you're just used to the YouTube version of this, and I need to service all the audio listeners, the audio from the first draft with Pat goes on my podcast feed in a vacuum, and all of these podcasts with Shawn go on the RotoViz podcast feed. They also have a special individual best ball feed as well if you're looking for just getting the best ball stuff, or you can get subscribed to the main RotoViz feed. I have those links down below. Someone in the chat, Shawn, had mentioned why not Mac. I think that could have been an interesting angle where you say, hey, we have Rhamondre, we have James Cook, you take Mac Jones, and then maybe you grab Hunter Henry in the last round and you build out kind of a backdoor thing. How were you thinking through that? Because that is another angle we sometimes take with these QBs.
A little bit for me is probably the exposures, where I have a lot of Tyquan and Gesicki, a lot of Tyquan and Hunter Henry, and then I put Jones with them, hopefully with a Buffalo player in the mix there. When I don't have those two guys because my exposures are really high on them, then I tend to not lean into that being a Mac team, even though I do think that he's going to take a jump. All you have to do is look at his rookie numbers. In a competent offense, he should be an effective player for you. He should be around 13, 14 type of guy. Is he a guy who could absolutely go off like Purdy? And how I think the chances of that for me are a little bit less. So I'm drafting him a lot, but I don't think he's maybe the tournament winner in quite the same way.
All right, Shawn, what do you like here? We got a couple Bengals backs at the top. We have a couple correlated tight end pieces in Hunter Henry, Noah Fant. Anything else jumping out to you?
Fant is interesting. I think that Chase Brown, you probably have to really be hammering right now.
Which one?
Let's go with Chase.
There you go. He's an interesting one. I was just talking with Pat about him. I've been taking, because it was last week, the pick I mentioned that I regretted was I could tell you had been leaning toward Trevion Williams. Even though we had taken a couple early running backs, I got panicky and selected Desmond Ridder. I forget which game stack we had, but maybe it was, it's the Minnesota one. And Trevion played the Vikings in week 15. And of course, after I saw everything that you were dialing up, and then I bulldozed it. But here we take Chase Brown, who is available. And a lot of times Chase Brown's going 10, 15 picks ahead of Trevion Williams, who goes undrafted. I've been very intrigued by both of those guys. I've been kind of leaning toward Trevion right now, just because I think it's just as likely he's the RB2, and you get the bonus of the fact he's not drafted in all of these, probably drafted in, I don't know, at least less than 10%, probably less than 5% of these. But I know you've been feeling that push-pull too of Brown here, Williams here. Are you still kind of 50-50 on those two guys?
They both offer such cool potentials. And maybe this isn't the right way to think about it, but I almost feel like if Joe Mixon is going to be there and it's going to be the starter in the first month, and that holds some time for, and I might have been optimistic about the idea that Mixon could really end up somewhere else, but that kind of holds you through for Brown to emerge. And like you were mentioning on one of the shows when we were debating this, the people covering the Bengals see that explosiveness that Brown has and think that he could be the guy. And so I had mentioned to you at the time that I'm more or less 100% on him in dynasty rookie drafts. We mentioned Blair earlier. He's got a fantastic article up on Chase Brown. I think when he was on Ship Chasing, that was one of the main points that he brought that night. Either of those two guys could work out very well. I think the point that you made about Travion, and something I've been trying to emphasize with him in the last round, when Brown is gone and the running back pick is where you're trying to go, then I think drafting Travion because he doesn't get picked is awesome. I think if you're going to get Chase Brown with the third to last pick, that you want to get exposure to him at those prices, even though we know that the ADP values are not as important from that perspective at the end of drafts, there's still a structural element where the players that you need to get, and especially think of like a build that we had today where you take the 2 late quarterbacks, we're saving those slots for the quarterbacks. If you're pushing Chase Brown in some of those, and then you get down to taking just the quarterback who's left in the final round, that hurts you. Even though it's maybe not ADP value consideration, those round slots matter. And so to be able to pass on Chase Brown and then take him at the end, I love that. So I'm trying to keep my exposures to the 2 players relatively balanced. I'm trying to get good prices on them. And like we've mentioned with some of their guys, if you're looking at a Sony Michel for 2023, what Sony did in 2021, then, I mean, those 2 players, almost certainly one of them will end up on the 0 RB candidates list. Maybe they both will. I like that pick at the end of the draft.
Yeah, let's recap this team. My 93rd Best Ball Mania 4 draft that has been streamed is in the books, which means I will be hitting the 100 mark sometime next week, which is very exciting. This team, 3-6-7-2, Kenny Pickett, Brock Purdy, Sam Howell. We had to play the hits here with these QBs. Running backs, Rhamondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, James Cook, and then a string of rookies, Devon Achane, Tajay Spears, and Chase Brown. Wide receivers looking nice. Cooper Kupp, Tee Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Jakobi Meyers, Marvin Mims. Often hard to get both of Dotson and Pickens together, at least in the drafts we do together, Shawn. So that's a fun pairing there. And then tight ends, Pat Freiermuth and Cole Kmet. So we do end up with the double stack with Kenny Pickett. We don't get a Seattle bring back in this one. We end up with a skinny stack, Brock Purdy and Ayuk with Dotson on the comeback, and then vice versa with Howell and Dotson and Ayuk coming back. Get some other mini correlations in here. What's your overall thoughts on this team? And also, I'm meaning to ask you, did you get together with Don Draper and rebrand punt QB as latent QB? Because I think that's a very delicate rebrand you did there.
I'm not even sure I'm following that, but I'm all in on anything that you're saying.
What do you think about this team, Shawn? That's what I'm really trying to say.
When we're looking at what we did with Pittsburgh and Seattle, that's the part that I think is interesting. And I'm really interested in how you like to play it, what you think about Pittsburgh with a couple of guys, but no Seattle player here. One of the things that I do notice in many cases is that if I end up heavy on Pittsburgh, but I've missed on those receivers, it is often on a Kenneth Walker team. And I mean, Pat has a lot of great information on the Seattle backfield, how you want to play that. I think that makes total sense. I really like Walker as a massive talent. Now, there were some inconsistency elements with him, but you have a guy, and I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me. I'll be talking about this in an article, but in terms of yards before contact, yards after contact, and evasion rate, hitting these extreme thresholds, he was only like 3 guys to hit what I'm normally looking at for the full season last year as a rookie. And even though, he gets stuffed on a number of these runs, to still have accomplished that, you get a sense of the explosiveness that goes back to college. I think you're getting great prices on Walker, and then maybe that alleviates a little bit of the pressure on those receivers. So, Pete, a little bit of a plug here. As we finish a 4,000-word article on just one NFL receiving group, and then a little bit about rookie wide receiver production, is going to be released there. 14 footnotes in that one. I had a lot of fun writing that. I'm a little biased, and so even though there's a ton of evidence, people want to take that into consideration. Not to give too much away, but it's pretty obvious. When we're looking at the Seattle group, all 3 of those receivers are tough to get. And so that's the part of it when you're thinking about Pittsburgh that is difficult. So when you're looking at Pittsburgh and you're building these teams, is Walker enough for you on the other side of it? And then the Fant pick has been one in the final round that I struggle with because I love Fant. And at the same time, I mean, even though they're not actually running the same routes, they're not playing the same position, it's hard for me to see how, with the way that they used Fant last year, can he come through and be a guy if you're going to have JSN in the mix as well? We talk about the late tight ends, and we want to have both the volume path and the talent path. I think with Fant, there's a very clear talent path, and it does round out some of these teams that are pretty cool. I guess I don't know that there's a volume path there for him.
Yeah. And I think when I select Fant, it's often obviously for correlation purposes, either a double stack with Geno or a bring back with the Kenny Pickett stuff. I think I'm going into the Fant pick with open eyes though, where he's in a 3 tight end build and it is more of a contingent play. And maybe you argue that's bad because there are a lot of tight ends at the end of the draft who don't need an injury or a contingency based, pitch to give them their value. But, when you are trying to figure out how do I win in week 17, I get it there. But like going back to what you're saying about how to play Seattle, I mean, other than Metcalf, I've been almost agnostic with it. I love Walker. I take a decent amount of Charbonnet, who again, kind of open eyes. I think he's more of a contingent play. I know people are kind of excited about maybe some standalone value there, but if Zach Charbonnet is the guy you need in week 17, Kenneth Walker's not playing. And that's how I kind of approach that situation there. And then, yeah, I take a JSN and Lockett a ton. I think when I reviewed my portfolio, realizing I had more Lockett than JSN was kind of surprising to me because I prefer JSN, but just the way things have shook out. But I guess to summarize, I love all those Seattle pieces and I love playing that game. And if anything, I can see myself trying to tilt more toward JSN and Walker down the stretch. It was just easier to get to Lockett and Charbonnet because they were the cheaper ones when you were kind of building stuff out. But I am very, very excited to read this piece you have, although I'm also a little terrified that it's going to push JSN into the 4th round, Shawn.
Well, part of my argument here, what I've been seeing, you mentioned the thing about like your drafts versus just drafts in general. JSN has been going almost a full round after Lockett in almost everything that I've done in the last week and a half. And yet when I'm looking at our ADP tool, which I think has some cool elements to it, and tracking those two guys next to each other, there's actually been a little bit of a bounce in terms of what we're getting from underdog with JSN in the last handful of days. I think that unless he comes out really fast in training camp, you're going to see those two prices continue to move in opposite directions. I think you want to load up at that point, and then maybe this is all just completely telling a story, and the stories can work in a variety of different ways. But then once training camp gets into full swing and he's really going, then he's going to start to fly right before the season starts. People are going to see him as the best guy. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what happens with that. But it was a fun exercise. I wanted to make sure I went into a lot of detail and went into a lot of background on some of these previous rookie receiver seasons to get a full sense of that. I mean, you can go through the numbers. You can put together great pieces that are predicated almost entirely on that. One of the things when you go through yourself and you do the exercise of just relearning about all of these guys from the past, it rounds it out for you. And the numbers become a little bit more real in terms of scenarios. And we talk all the time about the key thing in fantasy is being able to accurately price scenarios over time. It doesn't mean that you're not going to occasionally miss, or the scenario that you didn't feel like was the one that really should be emphasized hit in a big way, you end up wrong occasionally. But those pricing the scenarios is the key thing. For me, this kind of exercise is very helpful.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to reading that. I do have the link as always down below. You guys need to be subscribed to RotoViz, just doing awesome work over there. I need to catch up on a few of Blair's articles that you referenced. A lot of great stuff over on the site. I say it every single week and it remains true. Best bang for your buck deal in all of fantasy. If you guys enjoy listening to Shawn talk through these draft scenarios, I promise you will really enjoy the writing where he isn't rushed for time here as we frantically make picks. Shawn, one of my favorite writers writers in the industry, and I love doing these drafts. Appreciate all of you guys hanging out in the chat today. I'm going to be drafting, I believe, a couple more teams today over on Swolecast, and then tonight on Ship Chasing. And that is it for me. Appreciate you guys. We will catch you here on the channel. Best Ball Breakfast is every single Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. For Shawn Siegele, I'm Pete Overzet. We'll see you guys.